Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this morning's deliberations meeting of the Kaipara District Council regarding the representation review for 2021. The elected members joining the Zoom meeting right now, and of course, out there in viewer land, you're all very welcome to be joining us as well for this meeting. I'm going to open with a karakia. Thank you. Moment's silence. Kia hora te marino, kia whakapapu painamu te moana, hei horahi ma tātou I te rangi nei, aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou ia, tātou katoa. Thank you. At this point, I'm calling for apologies for today's meeting. And we have no apologies.
Through the chair, we have the apologies from Councillor Joyce Parky if she has technical difficulties getting into the meeting.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Joyce Parky, with technical difficulties getting in. Thank you. Are there any other apologies I have? All right, thank you. I'd like to move the apologies be accepted. I'm seeking a seconder for that. Councillor Curnow, thank you. All those in favour, please raise your hand and say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Moving on with the confirmation of the agenda, we have two items on today's agenda. The confirmation of the open minutes of the 6th of October and, of course, the representation review deliberations item. I would like to move the agenda as written, and I'm seeking a seconder for that. Councillor Wilson-Collins, thank you. Is there any discussion on this? No discussion, thank you. Putting this to the vote now. All those in favour, please raise your hand and say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. So we have our agenda for the day. Thank you. So the item number 1.4, conflict of interest declaration. Elected members, are there any conflicts of interest regarding the items on today's agenda? No conflicts of interest. Thank you. Right. We're moving on to item number 2.1, which is the minutes of the hearings which took place just last week for the representation review. So we have those minutes have been produced and they're in today's agenda. So I'm seeking a mover for those minutes. Councillor Curnow, thank you, and Councillor Wilson-Collins is seconding that. Thank you. Are there any questions about the technical matters of the minutes? No questions, thank you. So we're putting it to the vote now to receive these as a true and accurate record. So we're putting that to the vote now. All those in favour, please raise your hand and say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Moving right along to our substantive item for today, which is the deliberations on our submissions. We have a comprehensive recommendation here on page 8 of today's agenda, which is page 1 of this item. I would like to move the recommendations as written, and I'm seeking a seconder for that. Councillor Wethy, thank you for seconding that, putting this onto the table. And at this point, I'd like to welcome Councillor Joyce Parky, who's been able to join us, Morena, and I'd also like to invite Staff Officer Michael Day from our policy lead to introduce this item for us this morning. Michael, Morena.
Morena, thank you, Your Worship, and good morning, elected members. I'll start by taking the paper as read. So I will introduce the item as you just mentioned, and then I will also introduce our electoral officer, Dale Lofstovsky, who will provide a succinct summary of how we arrived at our initial proposal, as well as outlining the key principles to be considered when conducting a representation review. So the paper I would take as read, thank you. Key points being that 64 submissions were received on the initial proposal. As you mentioned, Your Worship, a hearing was held last week on Wednesday the 6th of October for those submitters who wish to be heard. As you also mentioned, you have the attachment A in front of you today, which is really why we are here. That attachment actually provides an analysis of the issues raised through the submissions, options and recommendations to support your journey today. Right now, I'll hand over to Dale to step you through how we got to the initial proposal. Thank you.
Got it, everyone. It's really just setting the scene, if you like, about how we got to where we are now and the few steps to go forward before we finish this process. So right back in last year, Council made two decisions. That was to confirm STV as its electoral system and to establish one or more Māori wards, which is two requirements under the Local Electoral Act made last year. When a council wishes to establish one or more Māori wards, it must undertake a representation arrangements review, which is what we're doing now. The legislation is quite prescriptive on what we should and shouldn't do when undertaking a review. Primarily there are three things that we have to look at. We have to look at what are the district's communities of interest. How do we provide effective representation to those communities of interest? That is, what's the total best number of councillors? Should we have wards? What number of councillors per ward, that sort of thing, whether there should be community boards. That's providing effective representation to our communities. And the third legislative requirement is fair representation of those communities. So basically, if we have wards, then each councillor should represent about the same number of people within plus or minus 10%. That's called the plus or minus 10% rule. So there is some exceptions to that rule. If we find that we divide a community of interest, for example, to comply with that plus or minus 10%, we can actually go outside of that that rule. But should we go outside of that rule, it's treated as an appeal and goes off to the Commission automatically at the end of the process. So we try our best to comply with it within that plus or minus 10% because it is a legislative requirement. So we're all familiar with our current arrangements. We have the Mayor elected at large and 8 councillors elected from 4 wards with no community boards. So that's our starting point, if you like, for the process. So when we look at a representation review, we must use population figures, not electors, because a lot of people consider that we should be using electors. That's not the case. We must use population figures either at the last census, which is 2018, or the latest population estimates, which is at 20th of June 2020. So council's using the latest population figures available, which is at 2020. And we have figures provided by the Department of Statistics of a total of 25,180 population, being 21,500 general electoral population and 3,680 Māori electoral population. So we started the process early this year, the actual representation review process, and we looked at a number of scenarios. I think looking back in my notes, we looked at 9, I think, initially, and they ranged from 2 to 4 wards, and that also included whether we look at 2 district-wide ward, 1 for general and 1 for Māori. So we've done quite a number of modelling, if you like, to achieve where we're at to now. So under the basis, under the formula of the Local Electoral Act, when we look at Māori wards, for example, between 8 and 10 councillors, we have 1 Māori ward councillor and the balance general councillors. And if we go to 11 in total or more, we can go up to 2. So council landed on an initial proposal and resolved on the 25th of August, their initial proposal being 9 councillors elected from 4 wards, that being 3 general wards and 1 Māori ward with no community boards. So once that decision was made on the initial proposal, we were required to make public notice of that, calling for submissions, and there's a 1-month submission period. When that closed, we had a total of 64 submissions that were received, and 7 of those wished to be heard, and they were heard on the 6th of October. So overall, we had just about 60% of submissions supported the initial proposal and about 40% opposed the initial proposal. So we're now considering those submissions. We've heard the submissions. We've got the written ones in front of us. So council really now has to either adopt the initial proposal as its final proposal, i.e. make no changes, or amend its initial proposal as its final proposal, so it can in fact make some changes. If council chooses to make any changes to its initial proposal, those changes must be based on submissions. So you can't bring anything completely from left field. They must result from submissions that were made. We also, under legislation, required to have reasons for things. So if we have made any changes to the initial proposal, we must provide reasons for those changes. We also must provide reasons for the rejection of any submissions. So that's something to bear in mind when we're working through the deliberations today, that at the back of our minds, we must provide reasons. So council is to meet on the 27th of October to resolve its final proposal. Following that, and within 2 days of that, actually, we must do another public notice calling for of the final proposal, calling for objections or appeals. And it's in that public notice that we have to state the reasons why any changes were made or reasons for the rejection of submissions. So we'll then have a 1 month period for objections or appeals, which will go to the end of November, 29th of November. We just need 1 objection or 1 appeal to be received, and the whole matter is forwarded off to the Local Government Commission for their determination, and they'll make their determination by, I think, 10th of April next year. So basically, in summary, I think the process has been well done, well undertaken. I think there's been a lot of good consultation. I think it's been robust, and we have fulfilled all our legislative requirements. So that's sort of just a very brief overview summary of where we are today. Kia ora.
Thank you, Dale. Thank you. And of course, welcome to today's meeting. It's wonderful and very reassuring for all of us to have your experienced hand supporting us as our electoral officer here with this very important work for ensuring democracy and representative or representation aspects of our democracy are upheld. And so your guidance and advice here is very, very important to us, and we really appreciate your great experience here. So thank you for joining us today. I see there's a first question here from Councillor Curnow.
Yes, thank you, Dale. Yeah, thank you for being with us through this process. I just have a question, and it is a process-related question. Some of the submissions brought some quite significantly different things into the picture. To what extent can we consider those or not?
Because they were submitted under the submission process, council can certainly consider those. They can take note of them, they can amend their initial proposal to reflect those submissions, or they can reject those submissions and, as I said, have reasons for that. And it may simply be that you know, a submitter, for example, might want 15 councillors or something, which in council's view is far too many for the size of the district, which would be a valid reason. So certainly, in answer to your question, this is the opportunity to reflect or make changes as a result of those submissions.
I could just tease that out a little bit. If those if one submission suggests something that would significantly affect some of the other submitters, but they didn't have a chance to submit on that, how does that work?
If you make a change to the initial proposal, then you go into the second public notice, and then anyone can make an objection. If you don't change your initial proposal and you do your public notice, then only those that made a submission can appeal council's decision. But as soon as you make a change, and it can just be one change, it becomes open for anyone to lodge an objection. So therefore, if there are changes that council have made to the initial proposal that weren't earlier consulted on, then the public have another right to object to that in the next month. But that, of course, goes directly off to the Local Government Commission to determine.
Okay, thank you. That's clear.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there further questions at this point for Dale regarding the process that we're in and the next steps ahead? Councillor Vincent.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a procedural question, but also in accordance with standing orders, I also want to give notice of an amendment I propose. So which first?
That's entirely up to you.
Okay, so that if I ask the procedural question, that doesn't eliminate my right to propose an amendment.
No, it does not.
Okay, because my question was just in clarification of that last point that Dale made. In the event that we alter the initial proposal in a single respect, does that open the door to people to object to the initial proposal in every respect?
Yes, it does, because you are amending, even though it's quite minor, you are amending the initial proposal, which triggers that right of objection by anyone.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll proceed with my suggested amendment, and I've already circulated the wording for that. I note that neither of the West Coast Central Ward councillors are present, and so I'm not too sure how this is going to fly, but I will. I'd like to move that the motion be amended in item B to add the words at the bottom of item B, except that item B3, Wairoa General Ward, is changed to Northern Wairoa General Ward. So I'd like to know if there's going to be a second for that.
Sorry, so just to be clear, so you are seeking you're seeking a new amendment, and I'm wanting here just to have absolute clarity. So based on the original motion here,
yeah.
So at section B, that agrees to the ward names are changed from the initial proposal outlined below.
Well, I thought
so
that
Wairoa becomes Northern Wairoa General Ward, and then at D agrees that the number of 8 councillors 8 as per the initial proposal, but you're then saying the Wairoa General Ward is now the Northern Wairoa General Ward.
well, I was trying to find the simplest way to express it, and rather than have to play around with the initial wording of that paragraph B, I was suggesting that we just add that the words I've put forward to the end of that, and then it would be clear to people who were looking at the decision as to what the change was from the initial proposal as well.
Okay, I with all due respect, councillor, I think that we can't have a motion that says at section B that it agrees and goes unchanged with the initial proposal, and then at the end of it says, oh, by the way, we're also changing from the initial proposal. We can't have both those two conflicting things. We're going to go to Mr. Maris for some advice here. Then we've got Councillor Larson wants to contribute here. So, but we just need technical clarity here about the amendment that Councillor Vincent is attempting to put on the table here and the confusion that we've got here.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship. We could. I agree with what you've said as chairperson there. The B could be changed to something like agrees that the ward names are changed from the initial proposal as outlined below, and we could put Northern Wairoa there. The follow-on recommendation, you would then subsequently add in Northern Wairoa to that recommendation as well, and that could be the amendment.
Oh, so I if I get this right, then and sorry for the confusion. So that at the big, if you like, the introduction to paragraph B, we say that the ward names remained unchanged from the proposal apart from the Northern Wairoa with the Wairoa Wood, and then recite them below.
So I would say quite simply, but see, this is your amendment.
Yes.
Vincent, so we're wanting you not to be tying us in knots here, but I would say that quite simply, you need to be crystal clear that the initial proposal is being changed.
Yes.
So anything that says that the initial proposal is unchanged is potentially going to confuse people.
Okay. So we could, and hopefully our scribe can make sense of it. The paragraph B should say then that the agrees that the ward names are updated from the initial proposal as outlined below, and then include at subparagraph 3 Northern Wairoa General Ward. How would that be reasonably clear?
So this that's helping. Yes. Mr. Maris and Dale Lofsowski, from a legal perspective, is it appropriate to say updated regarding inside the statutory process?
Or amended even would be the word, wouldn't it? Because it's an amendment.
For Your Worship, yeah, amended would be better, Councillor Vincent.
Okay.
I believe.
So the amendment is then that the wording of paragraph B is amended as follows. B agrees that the ward names are amended from the initial proposal, that comma outlined below, and then recite the ward names except with the one change from Wairoa to Northern Wairoa.
And through you, Your Worship, if I may, as far as recommendation D, you would also be amending the Northern Wairoa General Ward name in there as well.
There's a consequential amendment, yes.
Yeah, that's part of your amendment moving forward, yeah?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank
you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Tracy, for scribing this live on the screen. It's very challenging. Just while you're doing that, we have at this point a question from Councillor Larson, but before we get to the question, because we're happy here with the words, I'm going to seek a seconder now, and this is challenging. So Councillor Larson, are you the seconder? Because your hand is up.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I just before we go to that, I just see that.
No, Councillor Larson, sorry, that I'm seeking a seconder. That's all.
Well, that's fine, except that what's been transcribed below is not consistent with what is above at point
Yes. So just while we're discussing this, the team will be having exactly the same parallel language.
Oh, okay.
So that's why I'm just talking to the point that we have an amendment on the table. So I'm seeking a seconder for this. That's all. And your hand was up earlier.
Yeah. So at point B, it needed to be a word "as" in there, which Mr. Vincent didn't articulate when he amended the motion for it to be grammatically correct, and that's what I'm trying to communicate to you.
Yes.
And if that word was inserted, then I'd be happy to second the motion.
Thank you.
As the mover of the motion, I'm happy for that to be included.
Okay, thank you. Right.
Through your worship, maybe if Tracy, if you stop sharing your screen for now while you tidy that up for a second, and perhaps you can move on with the speaking portion, your worship, while we just tidy that up.
Yes, exactly. So thank you. So we have an amended recommendations on the table here, and so what we'll do at this point, it's now continuing with any questions for clarification for Dale or staff officers at this point. Okay, so we're not yet into statements and speeches, but if we can have any further questions for clarification at this point. No further questions. All right. Thank you. That's clear. So at this point, if you like, Dale, if you could turn off your camera, thank you. And so we'll focus back onto the elected members. But Dale, please remain with us. Of course, may be required yet. But at this point, we're going to move into statements and speeches and the decision-making part of this process of these deliberations. All right, but we've canvassed the territory regarding our questions for clarification. Thank you. So everyone should be clear that it's just the name of Wairoa is now being shifted to Northern Wairoa. Thank you. So Councillor Vincent, it is over to you to lead this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't want to waste your time with a great long speech. Just to canvass the issue, though, why I proposed it, it seemed eminently sensible to me when I saw this submission from Mr. Newlove. I had harboured concerns about the wording as it was myself, but couldn't think up a better alternative. One of my concerns is there was already a Wairoa district further down the line. There's the potential for some confusion there. The term Northern Wairoa has been in use ever since I've been living in this area over 35 years, and I think that it is readily identifiable by a lot of people in the community as in relating to the area that it is to canvass. So I would like it if we had the opportunity to take on board that, to me, eminently sensible suggestion without turning the whole process upside down. And my apologies for the toing and froing and trying to clarify that. I think the intent is quite clear. It's just a matter of how we record this procedurally, and hopefully our good people behind the keyboard have got that sorted out now. And I yeah, commend it to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Larson, statement.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I'm certainly very encouraged by the contributions made from the community towards this proposal, and it is a place that we've landed at with a lot of consideration, a lot of input from electoral officers and staff, and I think it's balancing things out quite well across the whole district now, and that's shown in a lot of support for that initial proposal that we have seen. And I think generally people should be quite happy with where this lands. With regard to the naming issue, I felt it's in a similar way to what Councillor Vincent has just articulated to us, that Wairoa to me sounds like somewhere way down the line. It's a little bit like Palmerston and Palmerston North. The northern and the north indicate a location, and certainly in my 50 years in the district, Northern Wairoa has been a name that I've always heard, and I think as a major feature of that area, is an appropriate name for the ward that area represents. So I'm happy to support that amendment as well. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Seeking further statements at this point. Are there any statements for? Are there any statements against?
Yeah.
Councillor Wethy.
Yes, I think it's a pity we hadn't had this discussion in a bit more depth, probably when we were looking at the original proposal. It does make sense. What concerns me a wee bit is that by making this amendment, we throw the whole process open to a whole series of potential submissions that really, winds us back to starting point again. But I do have some sympathy for Northern Wairoa because it is the area that is historically sort of centered on that whole district within Kaipara. So yeah, I'm just a bit disappointed that we've left it to this late stage before we've thought it through.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there further statements? A quick statement from me. Again, I echoing the sentiments here. They're on two levels. We've got nearly 60% of all of the submissions supported the proposals, and for this representation review regarding where the boundaries were, and that included the names. And so I think from a communities of interest perspective, I believe we've got it right regarding this representation review at the high level. Regarding the issue of this name, we had sought to create a consistent approach to the naming of our wards, for them all to be in Te Reo Māori, and to be focused on the names of the rivers rather than just where possible, and be a geographic descriptor. The notion of Northern Wairoa was discussed in one of those 6 briefings that we had way back at the very beginning, and when we were looking at names, and so but perhaps not sufficient attention was paid to that at the time. So so situation before us is regarding, if you like, getting and making sure that people identify with the name of the ward for which they will be electing councillors. That's the core of this. And so that, I guess, is the challenge before the elected members today in considering in these deliberations the change and the amendment, which is now up for discussion. So that's the core thinking that elected members need to have in this space. Okay, thank you, which is for the people out there, and what do the people think and how do they identify? Thank you. Are there further statements? Councillor Joyce Paki, camera's on.
Morena, everyone, thank you. Hey, I just want to echo some of your concerns or points raised there, Mr. Mayor, with regards to this has been out to public, 60% have come back and support proposal pretty much as it is. We could sit here and debate that name all morning because the river, although, you know, it is the Wairoa, it's not the Northern Wairoa, that's not the name of the river, but geographically I get that it starts to put a pin on a map. That area though includes the likes of Poto all the way along our coastal line up through to Waipawa, who don't necessarily connect with Northern Wairoa. So I'm just a little bit hesitant at the change this late in the game to put the word Northern. And that's not to say that's, you know, not something that I identify with myself, but, you know, having represented Northern Wairoa for a number of years, I get it, but I am a little bit disappointed that we might be considering a change this late in the piece. That will take us back 3 steps in order to progress this further. So I just thought I would share that card all this morning. Kia ora.
Thank you. Kia ora. Councillor Curnow, then Councillor Wilson-Collins.
Yeah, I lowered my hand because Councillor Joyce Paki has kind of said what I was going to say. It's, yeah, I do understand the sentiment around Northern Wairoa, but this is a very late stage in the piece, and the river is actually the Wairoa. So if we're being consistent around using river names, then that is a better name. Wairoa is a better name. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson-Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was quite happy to second this amendment just so that we could have this discussion. I was interested to see what the rest of the table had to say. I, having grown up in Dargaville, obviously do connect with the name Northern Wairoa. It is used in a lot of the organisations around here, but I also do understand and concur that Wairoa is the name of the river, and that we should have consistency around our ward names. So yeah, it's been a really cool and interesting discussion, and I do recall us talking about Northern Wairoa at one of our early briefings as well. It's also not the only name change of ward that was actually submitted either, so to pursue this one and not another one, I don't think is a correct procedure either. So I'll be voting against the amendment. Thanks.
Thank you. So those are statements from each of the elected members here. Councillor Vincent, back to you for a closing statement.
Through you, Your Worship, can I just butt in for a
sorry.
second? With an amendment, you don't get a right of reply.
Sorry, that's right. Sorry, my bad. I've only had one coffee this morning. Sorry. So there is no right of reply on an amendment. So at this point, we now have heard from everybody. So we are going to vote on the amendment. Now this is voting for the amendment to become the substantive motion. Yeah. So so we're going to vote on the amendment now? All those in support of the amendment, please raise your hand and say aye. All those against the amendment, please raise your hands and say no, no. Okay, so I think that's, yep. I think the nays have it. So the amendment is at this point defeated, but valiantly fought. Well done, Councillor Vincent. So we are back now with the original substantive motion as put, which was moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Wethy. And so at this point, and this is an open question, so we're now back at the beginning of the end, if you like. Elected members, are there more statements that we need to have here? I'm absolutely open to you regarding full statements about the glories of our representation review. So there are some statements that are wanted. All right, okay, right. So we'll start with me, and then we'll go to Councillor Wethy, and then everyone else will be able to make statements as well. So, so for this representation review, I focus on a very important statement made by one of our submitters, which is that this is probably as fair as can be. And for a district like Kaipara, which is fast growing and dynamic, that is an extraordinary turnaround from where we were 3 years ago when people were saying this is deeply not fair. We have here 59, nearly 60% of all of the submitters are in support of the initial proposal that the council carefully crafted over and across a year's work. And that is very significant for us because, of course, one of the challenges that we have was trying to get our communities of interest to be represented and to have their clear voices. And what we, of course, know as current elected members for Kaipara District is there are very, very distinct communities of interest in Kaipara District. And so to get a set of representation arrangements that align and can align with a district as diverse as Kaipara between these two oceans and two harbours is a great piece of work by everybody. I would like to commend the work of the staff and of our electoral officer, Dale Ofsovsky, who's been incredibly patient with us with all of the options we have gone through, including and considered, including options for fewer councillors than the number that we eventually arrived at, and of course looking also at fewer wards and so on and so on. But the approach that this council has taken is that the communities of interest are of paramount importance to us, and the very distinct nature of who and what comprises Kaipara District is what we're celebrating here in these representation arrangements. So again, thank you to all of the team for the great work behind this and the very careful considerations that have been made at every step of this process. There's still more to come, but for every step of this process, this has been carefully considered, and I congratulate everyone for that. Kia ora, Councillor Wethy as the second.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I agree with your comments about this has been a very robust process, and I was very encouraged to see the number of submissions that came in. And when you look at the actual detail of those submissions, you've got, just under 40 that were in support of that. Now, when you consider that we had 5 submissions that centred on opposing the Maori ward, which wasn't really part of our process or our mandate, and had at least, or arguably, or at least one, if not arguably 2 invalid submissions, the actual percentage of support rises to at least 65%, which is a significant figure for these sorts of deliberations. I also looked at the where the support came from, and I think that is quite important to make sure that we have got a universal acceptance across the district for this recommended representation change. Looking at Dargaville and Central or Western Central, they both had about 15% of the number of these submissions supporting. Tamatea had just about under 30, and Kaiwaka Mangawhai at around the mid 30%. So the actual level of support wasn't all focused in one area. There's a lot of support right across the district, and I think that is very important, that we aren't just sort of just being carried along by any one area within the district. So I think that I'm very, very comfortable with the way the recommendation has been finalised, and I think that is what the district as a whole will support and be encouraged, that this council has moved in this direction. So I totally support the recommendation as proposed. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We're going with Councillor Curnow, then Councillor Wilson-Collins, then Councillor Larson, then Councillor Vincent. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll keep mine relatively short and sweet. I want to first of all thank the submitters and the earlier responders to our survey. So we had good feedback, good input from people outside our council environment all the way along the process, and in particular the Mangawhai Matters group provided a really detailed report where they had done a lot of analysis, and it was actually very useful in the process. And also some of the submitters who came to the hearing brought some quite detailed information to back up their submissions. So I do want to thank people for really taking the time and the effort to be part of this process. It's really encouraging. I also want to thank Dale, who yet again is guiding us through this complex and sensitive process. And just to talk a little bit about there was sort of two principles that were on the surface looked quite conflicting when we were going down on this journey. One was to meet the changing needs of our different communities, and those are changing dramatically with lots of growth and pent-up growth in some places and released growth in other places. So there's some really dynamic forces at work here. So it was about trying to balance those needs out, at the same time trying to retain a sense of stability, because the last few representation reviews had dealt with some sort of changes of boundaries, and so the last thing we wanted to do was have people in and then out and in and out of different wards to try and create some stability. And the final point I make is that my colleagues will remember that I was quite interested in the idea of reducing the number of elected members along the way, but I certainly have been persuaded, and thank my colleagues for their efforts in persuading me that broad representation is helpful, and so yeah, I'm willing to go into that space too. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson-Collins, statement.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to thank the public that have been along on this journey with us, with all their submissions and everything that they've made. It is really, really difficult. I just want to acknowledge that for them, because unless they are present or wade through all our briefing papers, they don't necessarily have all the information in front of them. And so, unfortunately, we just really haven't been able to even consider some of the submissions that have been made, because they're outside the scope of what we have to work with, which has been explained a bit in this meeting today. But I just still wanted to thank them and thank them for being engaged, and their input is valid and appreciated. But we work within very tight tight frames within local government with all the consultation that we do, as they're probably learning as we go along. So just a big thank you, and thanks to the staff and Dale Osowski for their work. It's been a long journey to get to what is possibly one of our only options at this point in time, and we'll wait and see what happens after today. So thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, this balancing up has been something that's been wanted for a long time, and I certainly hope that people will be quite happy with that. I think 2 terms ago, on actual population numbers, the Otamatia ward probably ought to have had 4 councillors, the old Otamatia ward, when we had 3 wards. And then Kaiwaka Mangawhai ward came into making and had 2, and has now correctly been brought up to 3 on the population. I think that the West Coast Central and Dargaville councillors have been very gracious in accepting the changes that have occurred there with amalgamation and reduction in overall representation. So I think it's been a really mature approach that's occurred there. Even one representation review before this, the idea of disestablishing the Dargaville ward as an entity was not well regarded. So we have moved on in that regard and have these combined sort of urban and rural wards of both the Kaiwaka Mangawhai and the now Wairoa ward. So we have evolved. With regard to the name of the new Wairoa ward, I've listened to the views of the members today and those from that actual area, and taken on board the points that have been made there about that ward, in fact, representing a much larger area that aren't necessarily have a particular affinity to the river per se, particularly up the coast, and balancing that with the potential risk of opening up a potential appeal, which could have occurred if we had changed from the initial proposal. I felt that it was better to go with the initial proposal name of Wairoa. I've always known it as the Northern Wairoa as a name. That was the name of the river that I've always known, but I guess others perhaps just think of it as the Wairoa. I think it creates the opportunity in the next representation review, if there ever is such a thing, if this form of local government indeed does exist and has representation at all, in maybe 6 years' time, if there's sufficient feeling from the ratepayers in the impending Wairoa ward that they would like it to be called something other than the Wairoa ward, like the Northern Wairoa ward, then at that time further submissions will be seen. And if there were a majority supporting that at that time, well, there's the opportunity for a subsequent change if that ever occurred. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Vincent.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One of my reflections on this whole deal is I treat any submission received from the community in support of our proposal as a bonus, and to get so many of them, it's a really big bonus. So yeah, I'm really pleased with that, and I think the overall number of submitters is that fully met my expectations too. So that's all credit to the people who were running that process, Dale and his team, and also the Michael and his team. So yeah, good on you for that. And I realised when I put forward my amendment, however clumsily, that it was opening up the risk to further challenge of the process. But I just thought at that time that that made some sense. So I'm not doing a final speech on that. But thank you, Mr. Mayor. The other thing, I think, in terms of, before we get too carried away with the positivity of the support, what I read from a significant number of the submitters was that the positive ones, they were in support of the introduction of the Maori ward. So I think that they would at least more than offset the number of submitters who were opposed to the proposal by virtue of opposing the Maori ward, which is out of scope. So yes, we shouldn't get too carried away with those. Also, I guess I have to take this opportunity to say too, if with the benefit of hindsight, I would have been interested to pursue that option which came forward from Federated Farmers to I guess, achieve better alignment of interests and sense of community in terms of either the rural part of Mangawhai Kaiwaka being separated out, or as an individual ward, or alternatively that area being added to Otamatea as it once used to be, as Councillor Larston's pointed out. So, but I think the time for that is now past. If that were to be introduced at this stage, I think it would cause a lot of kerfuffle at the Local Government Commission, and that's some grief we can do without this time. And I guess, yep, taking on board Councillor Larston's comments again, to should there be another representation review for the Kaipa District Council, whether that would be in 3 or 6 years' time, that's something else to consider then. As far as the naming of the ward's concerned, I did have the rather naughty thought that whatever name it ends up with on paper, if people use the alternative name enough, it'll change to that. Just look what's happened to the name of our country. So that was about all I had to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Joyce Paki, statement. Thank you.
Morena, lovely summary, everyone. I just want to concur with most of what's been said, that, you know, I would applaud our, not sure if you can still see me, I might turn my camera off, sorry.
Yeah, no, we can see you perfectly.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, I just would like to thank those that put in submissions and ask them not to give up, that we did read them and consider them, but noting off the back of what Councillor Wilson-Collins has said, there was a lot of stuff that went on in the background, many a conversation and debate, and particularly to those of Dargaville who feel like they may have been ripped off in the session. You know, we're not going to get anywhere if we don't work together with our West Coasters. So I'm actually quietly excited about Wairō, and it comes down to representation and putting the best people forward. So if you want to have your voice heard, it's all about putting the right people up for election. And I grant you that's what we have to do. Yes, okay, we might have gone from 4 to 3, but that's not a loss. You don't need numbers, you just need strong voices. So yeah, don't give up and appreciate the feedback that's come in. I do have to apologise because I came in late. I didn't declare a conflict of interest, and it may be too late, but I do actually work for Statistics New Zealand, and I just want to do a bit of a plug that Census 2023 is a real thing, and this is how we get our information and our stats and our data, to actually sit down and have these reviews. Because this data is collected and taken from 2018, which feels like a long time ago. So I note in the feedback that there was a call for doing a review in 3 years' time, and I, you know, I'd support something like that so that we can have a more reflective data to position us to make good decisions. But ngā mihi kia koutou, thank you very much everyone for your submissions, and appreciate your time. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you. So those are statements from each of the elected members here. Closing statement from me, very much in line with what you've heard here, is thanking all of the submitters for this important work. The and I have a particular reflection based on what happened with the last representation review and one of the requests, and it was in the Local Government Commission results after the appeals, that they said, Kaipara District Council, you need to really look at your community boards, look at the opportunity for community boards. So we looked at community boards and we went, as a council, we went, if we put the boundaries of our wards in these places, those notions of communities of interest being reflected clearly should be constructive and helpful, and we shouldn't need to go to community boards. It is important to me that last time there was a lot of request for community boards. This time the communities of interest are going, no, we're seeing ourselves reflected in the representation arrangements that are proposed, rather than wholesale requests for community boards. So your elected members here have been listening and reflecting and deliberating very clearly in this space. So, but like I say, I'd like to thank all of the people who've put in very, very detailed submissions here, and all of those voices are all heard. So thank you very much. Namhi kia koto. At this point, we're going to go to the vote on this item. Thank you. So, Tracy Dean, if you would be so kind as to share from your screen the recommendation as it is proposed that on which we're about to vote. All right, so this is what we're about to vote on. So at this point, I'm calling for all the votes for supporting the recommendation as written. Please raise your hand and say aye. Aye. Okay, and anyone against, please say no. So that was unanimous support by the Kaipara District Council elected members today. Unanimous support. I would like that, please, to be put into the minutes of this meeting for this. So this has been carried. Thank you. This item has been carried with unanimous support. Thank you. Thank you. This brings us to very near the end of the meeting. I would like to thank again Dale Ofsovsky, our electoral officer, for his great work guiding us. And also I'd like to thank our own governance team inside Kaipara District Council for helping to shepherd this work through. The community will next see this item on the agenda paper for the October Kaipara District Council meeting, where there will be an opportunity and the full council decision will be made, because today was about deliberations. The full council decision will be made to adopt the proposal. So that will be in the October council meeting. So that Joy is but a couple of weeks away from now. So that's very exciting. So that is the next stage of the cross on this very important part of our democracy in the mighty Kaipara. So thank you everybody for your attendance today. I'm going to now conclude today's meeting with a karakia. Kia tau nā manakitanga a te mea ngaro, ki runga ki teina a tātou, kia mahia te hua makihikihi, kia toi te kupu, toi te mana, toi te araha, toi te rea Māori, ti he Māori ora. Have a good day, everybody.
Yeah.
Kia pai tō, and please get vaccinated. Kia pai tō.